The purpose of Wealth Talk is to educate, inform, and hopefully entertain you on the subject of building your wealth. WealthBuilders recommends you should always take independent financial, tax, or legal advice before making any decisions around your finances.
Welcome to episode 78 of Wealth Talk. My name's Christian Rodwell, the Membership Director for WealthBuilders, and I'm joined today by our founder, Mr. Kevin Whelan. Hi, Kevin.
Hello, Chris. Good to be with you again on episode 78.
Yes, as always. And today we are focusing in on the property pillar, and we have a guest today who will be giving us his views on an interesting time in the property market at the moment, Kevin, isn't it? Because we're certainly seeing a resurgence, and we'll see how far that resurgence can last for, because we know that we are in a recession, and the outlook over the next 12 months or so with the end of all of these government schemes is coming to an end soon. So yeah, be interesting to hear those views today.
Yes, I mean, so we're going to be talking to Frank Flegg, who's a really interesting guy from a business called the Ethical Property Partners. And I've known Frank for a few years. We kind of bump into each other every now and again, but every time we do, we almost say, why haven't we done more together? Why, it's almost one of those sort of guys. I like his laser-like brain. I think he's a bit like me, Chris. He's got a CAT scan brain, but with him, it's about property. And I think you'll get a sense of that when you listen to the interview. So very interesting guy, and an interesting perspective on the current recession. And actually, when I listen to him, I sort of find myself agreeing, which is interesting. With economists, don't normally agree with somebody else's view of the economy, but I found myself agreeing with him. We are in a recession, of course, but property seems to be holding up, and I think Frank has got a way of articulating that. And of course, what I'd say, as always, to our listeners is listen out for the wealth lessons that reflect what we teach at WealthBuilders. So listen out for what he says about the freedoms. Listen out for his thoughts around the reason why and what kind of drove him. And listen out for the entrepreneurial side of things, where you solve problems. You're always looking to solve a problem. So listen out for those. And then Chris will debrief at the end in the way we normally do.
We will. And just before we head over there, quick shout out for our latest Trustpilot review from Carl Yeent. And Carl has said, I'm at the start of my wealth journey and have just started listening to the Wealth Talk podcast, and I am hooked. The information given has been so inspiring and educational. I can't wait to listen to more. And he can't recommend highly enough. Anyone serious about obtaining wealth should be listening. So thanks, Carl, for that review on Trustpilot this week.
That's very nice, isn't it? I like the choice of language there, inspiring and educational. And of course, we seek to do that, don't we? In fact, it's part of the strap line of what we say. We want to educate, and we want to entertain a little bit as well. So that's all good stuff. Well, let's listen out for what Frank has to say, and then we'll have a little chat about that, Chris.
Frank, welcome to Wealth Talk today. Good to have you on.
Thanks, Christian. Yeah, glad to be here, mate.
So, Frank, we are in interesting times at the moment. There's obviously lots of discussion been going on all year, but we would love to get your thoughts and opinions today on, why right now is a good time to be looking at investing in property in the UK, especially. But before we do that, would you mind just giving our listeners a little bit of background as to yourself and what you do?
Yeah, sure. So I was a secondary school science teacher. I finished that in 2007 and decided I wanted to work full-time in property. So I went and got myself a job as with an estate agent, commission only. 6 weeks later, decided I'd actually start my own estate agency and opened the doors in November 2007, which if your memory goes back that far, probably the worst month in a decade to open an estate agency, given that the credit crunch really bit in December 2007. So yeah, baptism and fire really in 2008, but escaped bankruptcy by the skin of my teeth. I'd opened an office opposite Savills. city centre, Nottingham, NG1. Couldn't have been worse timing, worse decision making. But realised that there was a niche for helping investors to build portfolios, and that's what kept us alive. In 2009, we did 26 transactions. We were buying the properties ourselves, we were refurbishing them, we were tenanting them, and then we were selling them on. In fact, I think it was the Daily Telegraph came and they sent a couple of guys up to interview us and photograph me and my business partner, and they did like a half-page spread on a success story in the depths of a recession. They decided they wanted a good news story, unusually. So we had a pretty good year in 2009, and then continued to build on that. I got to about 5 years ago, and I was just flipping a few properties a year. I was working 3 days a week. I was taking 15 weeks holidays some years. I was earning a really solid 120 grand a year, and realized I was quite bored. I just repeated the same year a few times over. My business partner and I had gone separate ways in 2010, and I just carried on. I built myself a decent portfolio. I've got at that point, I think I had about 45 properties, and realized that actually I know sometimes it sounds a bit arrogant, like a lot of people want freedom of location, freedom of time, and financial freedom. Well, I kind of had all three. I couldn't not work for a month. I had to work, but I'd gone from working 70, 80 hours a week to working 30 hours a week over 3 days. It felt like I was on holiday, a 4-day weekend, most weekends. But I was bored, and I realized that there was something missing. And I really did some soul searching and realized that I needed a purpose. I needed a passion. And I thought back to my time at university. I grew up in West Wales, but I went to university in Nottingham. And I was really shocked when I went to Nottingham about the level of homelessness. I'd not really seen homeless people living in West Wales. Like, my nearest town was a 20-minute drive away. My nearest nightclub was 45 minutes away. I hadn't seen a lot of homeless people. I'd been to London and Swansea and stuff and seen people on the streets. But in Nottingham, they seem to be everywhere. Like, on my cycle ride to university each day, I'd see the same homeless people on the street, and we'd go out to drinking of an evening, and there'd be people sat next to ATMs, and I just wasn't used to. It was a real shock to my system. I hadn't been immunized against it. I hadn't become used to it. And so that really niggled at me when I was at university. In fact, I'd come up with this idea. My best mate at uni, Adrian, his dad had passed away when he was doing his A-levels, and he bought a house very sensibly with his inheritance. He bought a house, and I lived in the house with him and 2 other mates, 4 of us. So we had a bit of a nicer house than your typical student house. And we had a garage. And I remember talking to them about, how about we interview a homeless person and they come and live in our garage? We'll make it into like a bedroom, and we'll take them to a charity shop and buy them some clothes, and we'll write them a CV, and we'll help them get a job, and then they can go rent their own place and we can do it again. And I got really excited about this extracurricular housing project. They were less excited because they didn't like the idea of someone having keys to the house while we left all our laptops and some bikes in the house all day. So it never happened. But when I got to this soul searching point, so I was around, how old would I have been? I've been just turned 30. I was, maybe it's a bit young for a midlife crisis, but I just started thinking, what's going to give me more meaning? I'm providing for my family. I've got kids now. How am I going to jump out of bed with a bit of a spring in my step? Because I was a bit flat. And I thought back to that housing people that I'd never done. And at any one point, we've got empty houses, we've got a void for a few weeks, or we've just bought something that we're refurbishing. And I started really thinking about that. And we kicked off the Stepping Stones housing project, which I thought that would be a really good way of housing lots of homeless people. And then so from that came Ethical Property Partners, whereby I figured if I could help other people, I've got two ways of housing. I want to end homelessness globally, and I'm proud to shout it from the rooftops. I sometimes get sniggered at that, that's a very lofty ambition. But if you don't shoot for the stars, what's the point? And if my kids carry on my legacy, then that's great. But I thought to myself, I've got two options. I can either become Warren Buffett, Bill Gates level of wealthy and donate to ending homelessness, and I quite frankly didn't back myself to get to that level of wealth. And so and the bad thing about that is, in order to get to that level of wealth, you have to compound, which means you don't help people in the meantime. If you look at both of those, they've created their foundations and their philanthropic work very late in their careers, and so if you never get there, you actually don't help anyone, which didn't appeal. So, and I'm not knocking what they've done. It's phenomenal, the charitable work that both of those individuals have done. So what I looked at is, how could I help people to replicate my relatively low level of success, but my level of financial freedom, etc., so that they could start giving back to their communities and housing the homeless. And that's where I came up with a property franchise. There are very few around that help you to invest in your own portfolio. There's only one other that I'm aware of, and we have done that for the last 5 years. So we're now at 70 franchisees across 4 countries, and are expanding. We've just sold the rights to Australia. We're in negotiation with America at the moment. We've got active franchisees in Ireland, Wales, and England now. And so I'm really proud to say that we've just exceeded 150,000 nights where a homeless person has slept in one of our beds rather than on the streets or sofa surfing. And so, if I'm honest, I'm very proud to say that is the realization of a dream from 20 years ago, and it's growing every single month. More people are doing stepping stones on the franchise, and we're housing more and more people every night. So that's a very quick, maybe a bit longer than you thought, but a very quick press of my last 15 years in property, something like that.
Yeah, well, congratulations on that achievement, Frank. That really is something to be proud of. And obviously, we talk about multiple pillars at WealthBuilders, holistic. So, on a personal note there, you're building a business around property pillar, the business pillar, creating IP, which is fantastic. But, of course, I can see from the way you talk, it's really, it's driven by your desire to help and really have an impact, and talk about different freedoms there, freedom of, really being able to give back and make a difference, which is commendable. So, Frank, we want to talk really today as well, using your experience of why someone should be thinking about investing right now in the UK, and perhaps some of your thoughts as to, the best ways to be approaching that, because there's so many different strategies within property. It can cause overwhelm sometimes with people, and, they can spin around and not necessarily make the progress that they want to. So what would be your advice for someone, maybe at the beginning of their journey, but also many of our listeners who are, already very involved in property, some of the things that they should be looking out for as we approach a recession, or even are in a recession right now?
We're in a recession, but without the customary housing drop. We haven't seen that yet. It's a very unusual situation where we're seeing a housing bubble at the start of a recession. In fact, in my lifetime, I don't think there's ever been a situation quite like this, where we know there's a crash coming, but we're actually in a really buoyant part of the market. It's amazing to be able to. So we've sold. I've never sold so many properties so quickly. I think I'm just selling my 4th in as many months, and it's because I'm getting top dollar for my properties. It makes complete sense to sell, because I'll be able to buy. Well, conservative estimates are that in 12 months' time, property prices will be at 15% lower than they currently are. If you look at RICS projections, the government's own projections, there are the odd newspaper that's saying it's going up and up and up. But if you look at the underlying economics, it doesn't really look possible. Now, anything's possible, but I don't think it really is likely that house prices are higher in 12 months' time than they are today, when you look at the perfect storm of what's happening. And I won't bore the listeners with the economics, but we've got furlough ending, or very, very restricted furlough commencing in November. So you've got furlough ending this month for the vast majority of people. So employers have got to decide, are they actually bringing these people back or not? So we're going to see mass unemployment. In my opinion, the fact that you get £1,000 more in January if you keep people on, it's a bit of a joke. You've got VAT has been postponed until next year. You've got corporation tax has been postponed until next year. You've got the stamp duty holiday ending in March. There's a lot of things that are happening. You've got bounce back loans, coronavirus loans. The bounce back loans are then the larger C-bills loans they were, weren't they? All the interest on those is starting to be paid next year. So 2021 is going to be a really tough year for the safety net and the support that was put in place ending. At the same time, the government have got to raise taxes. They've got to start recouping this money. We had the autumn budget cancelled. Understandably, the government didn't want to introduce more uncertainty into a very uncertain climate. That's going to kick off. I anticipate capital gains tax going up. I anticipate quite a lot of taxes going up, actually. So there's going to be this perfect storm next year. I don't think we can get away from the macroeconomics of house prices coming down. People will not be able to pay their mortgages. Many people, businesses going under, employees being made redundant. And at the same time, mortgage lenders are already, we've seen this the last 3, 4, 5 weeks, already becoming far, far more stringent on their lending. So people won't be able to refinance. People won't be able to purchase as easily. If there's less purchasers and more sellers, prices come down. We're in a bit of an artificial bubble right now. There's loads of people that are buying on emotion because they didn't enjoy lockdown in their current home. So they didn't enjoy lockdown. They want an extra bedroom. They want an extra piece of garden. And so they're buying with not a lot of consideration for long-term affordability. So I think we're in a unique position, Christian, of being able to see a crash coming and getting ourselves ready to invest in it. Those two types of people that you just mentioned, the experienced property investors and the less experienced, I think should approach that situation in two very different ways. Where someone is now is not actually that important. It's where they're going. So Stephen Covey says, start with the end in mind. Where does that investor want to end up? That's the important thing. And the destination is a sophisticated investor that has built a significant portfolio for themselves, and they are in property as an active investor, as one of their occupations, maybe not full time, but 15 hours, 20 hours a week or something. If that's an end point, then they should be approaching this recession and this housing crash in a very specific way, which I have. However, if the other destination is their current business, or they're happy with their current employment and they just want to add property as an asset class, so they don't want to be massively active, they just want to have money in property and have the leverage that property gives them, then they should approach this recession in a very different way. So those are the two. That's the first decision for someone to make. In 5 years' time, where are they going to be? Are they going to be active, sophisticated, running a property business, if you want to call it that, or are they just going to have some passive property investments? That's the first decision I would start with.
And you talked about, obviously, the outlook for 2021 and lots of things coming to a head, which could make the landscape pretty messy and difficult for a lot of people. And we talk about opportunities here now, not in a way that is taking advantage. And of course, in the very name of your company, Ethical Property Partners, there's a way to create a win-win. Frank, can you talk about some of the ways that someone can, help someone who's maybe in a bit of a distressed situation, so that there's benefit for both sides and both come out on top?
Absolutely. And I think this is one of the biggest misconceptions about property investing or sophisticated property investing. And I think that misconception is that it's somehow predatory. It's somehow taking advantage of people. It can be. the industry has a reputation for that, and I think the reputation is deserved on the whole. We've called ourselves ethical property partners just deliberately to disassociate ourselves from people that do this business wrong. And so we have 42 documented scenarios whereby people sell property to us. And it can be anything from they've got a business opportunity and they need quick cash to be able to capitalize on that business opportunity. It can be someone who's emigrating for work purposes. It can be someone who's inherited a property that they weren't expecting and they just want whatever money they can get for it. It can be someone who's in negative equity, so they can't sell on the open market, but we can buy from them over a period of time and clear their mortgage for them. It can be someone who can't pay their mortgage and is in danger of repossession. We've been to court and helped people to halt repossessions in order to buy from them. So we're always looking at every person involved in a transaction benefiting. So if we've put a transaction together, even if we're not buying it, we need to be paid for our time. We need to be providing a quality service to the vendor, whether we're buying over time, whether we're buying at a discount. They need to be getting value for the equity that they're paying us in, or the flexibility they're paying us in. An investor, if they're lending money or if they're buying the property, they need to get really good value. And of course, the final end user of the property, whether it's a homeless person, whether it's a family renting the property, whether it's someone having a holiday and a holiday let, all of those stakeholders need to be getting value from it. Yeah, it's very important, Christian. Yeah.
And when we are in a difficult time, a recession, are there additional checks or things that people should be thinking about when they're purchasing property to make sure they're buying safely?
Yeah, you need to be recession proofing your investments. So by that, there's two ways of losing money in property. The first is if you buy wrong. So if you buy in the wrong area, if you buy at the wrong price, that's the first way you can lose money in property. The second way is if you have to sell in a hurry. So if you make sure that your investment is cash flowing positively for you, then you're not going to ever have to sell it. You can pick when you sell the property. So long as you buy in the right area, the right type of property with the right monetization strategy where there is a demand for it. I was just sat with a couple about an hour ago. They're buying their fourth property. They're doing it as an armchair investment. We're building their portfolio for them over time. And they asked me about student property. And I said, I wouldn't touch it with a barge pole. I have never bought student property in the UK. And they asked me why. And the reason for that is I cannot predict over the long term the demand for student accommodation in any particular city. Now, if you look at cities around the country, universities have built masses of purpose-built accommodation. Well, supply and demand just means that your 3-bed terrace that you were letting out to 4 students is going to have less students wanting to rent it now that they've built. My university in Nottingham, they built 1,600 one-bedroom flats over the course of like a year. Well, that knocks out 400 4-bedroom houses from the private rented sector. And so I wouldn't touch student accommodation because I can't control how successful or unsuccessful a university is going to be. I can't control whether students from China continue to come to university here or not. And I can't control if the university builds loads of accommodation. So it's about picking investments that have multiple monetization streams that are very, very safe moving forwards. People often look at my transactions and go, wow, you're really high risk, you're really sophisticated. But actually, I use my sophistication to be really safe. I'm actually a very risk averse investor. And you look at some of the compounding strategies that I use. So we might use 8 or 9 strategies on a single transaction. But if they didn't work, what people sometimes miss is that might be plan B. Plan A might not have worked. Plan B worked amazingly, but I also had plan C, D, and E, and plan E still made me money. A mentor of mine used to say, heads we win and tails we don't lose. And that's a really good rule to live by in sophisticated property investing. Yeah.
And of course, making sure that you've got the right education. We talked a bit about this, Frank. I know you're an avid reader, and education is obviously key to anyone who's getting into property, and even a new strategy. You need to understand the asset before, investing your money.
Absolutely. And so I've studied real estate, as they call it in the rest of the world, in Australia, in America, and taken what we can use here. I've looked at how commercial property investors use financial tools, etc., and applied those to residential property here. And I've had numerous mentors. The key thing for me is, and let's go back to those two, that person who's got two routes, okay? One where they want to become an involved, sophisticated investor, and the other where they just want to hold passive property investments. I think sometimes the two get confused. So people go on to a free webinar and they hear about the glitzy next strategy, which might be service accommodation, or it might be rent to rent. There's nothing wrong with that. We use all those strategies. We use service accommodation, we use holiday lets, we use rent to rent. That there's nothing wrong with the strategies, but it's the misapplication of those strategies. So the person who just wants 5 buy-to-lets in 5 years' time to be producing an income for them to supplement their income, where they want to spend 1 hour a quarter, that person shouldn't be looking at any of those strategies. Those are time-intensive strategies, high monetization. You quadruple your profits for sure on service accommodation, for example, but that strategy doesn't suit that person. That person doesn't want to spend 10, 20 hours a week learning that strategy, because that's what it takes to properly learn a strategy. You have to really apply yourself. You have to practice it. You probably want a mentor there to hold your hand, and you're going to make mistakes. The first, second, third deal are going to be mediocre or perhaps poor, and then you're going to get better. So if someone's only wanting 5 investments, they're far better keeping it simple, doing single AST property, so single lets. Bread and butter housing is what we talk about, not necessarily spending loads of time and energy trying to get below market value, because they are focusing their time on being a really good employee or being a really good business owner. And so they're happy to put in a 25% deposit. Like the couple that came to me earlier today, they're in that first category where they're just wanting some highly leveraged properties. And when I say highly leveraged properties, I mean time leverage. They said, how much time will I need to spend on this property? And I said, if you sit down for half an hour a quarter to check your numbers and check that it's all going to plan, and perhaps call your letting agent, which is us, call us to ask any questions, that will be ample, because we're doing everything else for you. For them to try and learn how to do service accommodation is a ridiculous thing to do. They'll never get a return on that time. Whereas the other person who wants to be, and they're paying market value, they're putting £25,000 into £100,000 property, but the agreement, in fact, I have it right in front of me from earlier. The agreement that they've signed is that they will pay £30,000, a maximum of £30,000. So that means they're only buying up to £120,000 property with a 75% loan to value mortgage, with a minimum net profit per month before tax of £200 a month. That's an 8% return. So it's a guaranteed minimum of 8%. Now, we can actually source at 9, 10, 11 and 12%. And I deliberately, it's a minimum agreement. So we might source them a property at £100,000 where they put in 25 and they achieve an 11% return. Well, that £25,000, and sophisticated people will go, well, that's not a very good deal. Well, it's a perfect deal for them, because that £25,000 at the moment is probably earning them less than 1% in the bank. And even if they put it in a fixed rate bond, they're going to get less than 2%, whereas they're earning 8% there after all expenses, minimum, on an ongoing basis. And over the next 5 or 10 years, I'd be amazed if that property doesn't go up in value and they get some capital growth as well. So if we see 10% capital growth over the next 5 years, that'd be very conservative. Their 100 grand property is now worth 110, but they've only put 25 grand into it. So now they've got a 40% increase in their equity as well. And so that leveraged passive armchair, if you want to call it, investment it's really it's very important to be clear on it and not to beat yourself up. A lot of people, YouTube, don't never buy at market value. You're a mug if you buy at market value. Well, hang on a second. Market value is the average of what everyone pays. So how can you be a mug? That is by very definition the average of what a property is worth. And so if it ticks your boxes and enables you to focus on what your passion is, then it's absolutely appropriate. The flip side of that is the person that wants to have a portfolio of 20, 30 properties and wants to be very active in property. Then it's worth investing way more in the nuts and bolts of how to do it. So how do you market to motivated vendors? How do you communicate with them effectively? How do you structure these deals? Like, we've got 61 different strategies for monetizing property. Then it's worth learning that and investing in your education. Some of our franchisees are doing a transaction a month at the moment. So they're buying a property a month for themselves. That over a 3 or 5 year period will transform their net worth. So yeah, I think, Christian, it's about having the right approach for each person. Yeah, there's no one size fits all.
Interesting there as well, isn't it? It's been said before, success begins in the mind. And if you believe that opportunities are there, if you believe that you can find them and that you can be successful, then, that is the starting point.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree more. And the number of people that come to us, so typically we'll buy at 25 to 35% below a RICS bank valuation. And the number of clients we have who don't really believe it, even when they're sat in front of the vendor, and they'll typically take a property mentor with them, and they'll sit there and they'll make the offer and they'll hold their breath, and we train them in this: just make the offer and just don't say anything. And then when the vendor actually says yes, like we had one brand new investor being with us, I think he'd been with us about 6 weeks, and he went to the vendor without a mentor, actually, which is against our best advice, and he said, "I could have fallen over backwards, Frank. It was £120,000 property. I offered 86 or something, so just over 25% discount." And he said, she just said, "Yeah, that'll work. When do we start?" And he said, I could have fallen on the floor, because it's that belief, it's that level of belief of this is actually possible. Because here's the thing, the actual mindset of that person and of many, many people is, I'm not worthy of that. Because what we're doing is we're selling a service. So that vendor who's selling at 85 for £120,000 property, or 86, is paying us in equity, so in a discount, for the service of buying her property quickly. And so then if you turn that around, we become a salesperson, not a purchaser. So now we're offering a service. And do we believe that our service is worth, what's that, £34,000? Do we value ourselves enough to charge someone £34,000? It's a hard question. And people go, of course I could buy a house at 30% below. But in the moment when they have to actually make the offer, they bottle it. Their intonation or the language they use, I know it's very low, but we'd only be able to offer 86. As soon as you say something like that, the vendor thinks, oh, they don't even think I should go ahead. So should I be worried? Whereas saying to them, in your situation, I understand why you need to sell very, very quickly. We can do that. We can buy this in the next 28 days for you. In order to buy that quickly, we can pay £86,000. Does that kind of figure work for you? That's very different. You can hear the confidence. You can hear the professionalism in my voice. It is fascinating. People come to us to learn the strategies, but they leave EPP having learnt the correct mindset to work the strategies. You've hit on a very interesting point. I could talk about that for a couple of hours, Christian.
Well, Frank, I've very much enjoyed speaking with you today and hearing your outlook and your thoughts for what is probably going to be a bit of a bumpy road ahead, but it's not a road that we haven't been on before. So we can learn from the past and prepare ourselves for the future.
So can I just leave you with a final thought, Christian?
Oh, please do.
So the Chinese have a saying, and that is that the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time to plant a tree is today. So if you weren't in property investing 20 years ago, my take-home message is don't procrastinate, don't delay, start investing today. And the biggest risk, I think, to property investors is not taking action. Of course, you want to do your due diligence. Of course, you want to make sure you're buying in the right area, that you've got an asset that's going to monetize for the long term. But I see far more people disappointed that they never actually got in because they were still trying to time the market than people who took action, bought property, then bought better again. And we have to remember, we live on an island. House prices go up because there's scarcity of land. And so even if house prices go down in the short term, buying now is a far better idea than trying to guess the market, because who knows? Boris just this week has said he's generation buy. He's going to bring back 95% mortgages. How short memories are. Do they not remember what happened the last time we had 95% mortgages? But who knows? Other than who knows what's going to happen in the short term. But what we do know is in the long term, property is a phenomenal investment. So if I can leave your listeners with that take-home message, it's if you're considering property, don't hesitate. Yeah.
Thank you, Flegg. And if anyone wants to find out more about Ethical Property Partners and watch some of your videos online, where's the best place for them to go?
Yeah, sure. Probably our podcast is a good place to start. You can search Sophisticated Property Investing or Ethical Property Partners on all the podcast platforms. Alexa will find me. You'll hear me with my squeaky little voice. Alternatively, you can find us on YouTube, Ethical Property Partners. Those are probably the best two places to find us. Otherwise, ethicalpropertypartners.com, and you can get in touch with us, watch loads of videos about us, find out what we're all about. So, yeah.
Thank you, Frank. Great to have you on today.
Thanks, Christian. Thanks for having me.
Okay, so Frank talked there, Kevin, about obviously starting up business back in 2008, 2009, very difficult period. But Frank managed to find a niche, and actually, it was a real starting point for him to then grow and get to the point where he has today. But perhaps there's a parallel there with yourself, Kevin, because I know that was around the same time that you really had that, I guess, epiphany moment about how you wanted to help people as well.
Oh, it's a great point, Chris, actually. I think anytime there's a unique set of economics, there's an opportunity to think through your own solution inside that position. And we're definitely going to see challenge with lending. So being in a position to be more creative in how you fund things. And that's a really interesting set of skills, Chris. And I think we covered that a few episodes ago. I can't remember the podcast number, Chris, but we talked at length about how you can make yourself irresistible to investors, and you need to build more skills when the economics are more difficult. But no, you're quite right. I mean, in 2007-8, when the world kind of fell off a cliff, it kind of made me realize how tough it was for people to build their wealth with the convention of the stock market, and how devastating, that over-reliance on the stock market can be. And I think all we've really seen since then, Chris, since 2008, right the way through to now, is that lesson's not being learned. So many people still over-relying on a single thing, one job, one business, one method of getting financed, one asset that they're building wealth. And this is always a challenge. So I think one of the things that I'm so proud about is the fact that at WealthBuilders, we're so holistic. We deal with all 7 assets, not just one. And not that I have anything against outstanding people in their field, like Frank is in property, but it's just reinforces the point. I mean, look, he made a mistake, right? So he got into property as an estate agent. He said he lost money. And that's a good thing to know as well. Not that he lost money, of course not, but that he has resilience. And when you have resilience and you have confidence, then, you can bounce back from any situation. And then I was delighted for him that he's gone on from strength to strength. And I think there's another parallel, Chris, that not a lot of people know is when I originally did my economics degree, part of what I was thinking, because I just love teaching, was at one stage, I was planning to be an economics lecturer. So that teaching, part of me was desperately trying to get out. And now I kind of teach grown-ups a different form of economics, which is the economics of wealth building. And Frank's a teacher too. Mentioned, didn't he? He's a science teacher, but he's a great teacher. I've seen him teach. I've been involved in his classroom, and the guy's just very clever, and he's got a brilliant way of solving problems. And I think that's a parallel with Wealth Builders as well. And I like the fact that he is not just creating that solution for himself, but he's teaching others, with his franchisees who are buying into his IP. You can hear all the assets that Frank is building. He's no longer reliant on that one idea that he had way back in whatever it was, 2007. And I think even now, one of the things I like about what he says is, remember I say to you, Chris, that you've got to build your wealth on the entrepreneurial side of things. You've got to build your wealth on property or business or IP or joint ventures, because that's where you can solve other people's problems. And for anybody who is interested enough to look at his website, the vision of Ethical Property Partners is transforming lives by solving property problems. So he's coming at it from a very similar viewpoint. You transform lives by solving problems, but in his case, it's a very strong focus on solving property problems. And I've seen his CAT scan brain in action as he teaches other people in his classrooms, when people bring case studies to him, how he can see that. And I recognized a very similar skill that we both have, which is why I suppose, I resonate with the guy. He's a nice guy.
Yeah. A wonderful mission, of course, that Frank has with wishing to eradicate homelessness completely. And congratulations for the achievement of just hitting 150,000 nights as well of, keeping someone off the street. So that really is amazing. And interesting that Frank talked about reaching that point of financial independence, which of course is a goal for so many of our members, but then actually after a while realizing that even though he had the time freedom and the financial freedom, the freedom of location, there was still something missing. And I think that's where that freedom of purpose obviously then started to become very, very important to him.
Yeah, I mean, I think but it's demonstrating a principle as well, isn't it, Chris, with the 5 levels of wealth, that as you move through the levels from insecurity to security, then on to independence, then you're looking into abundance and then on to legacy. Now his family's relatively young, but he mentioned the word legacy in there, so that's important to him and his wife, Vanda, really important, for his family. But the thing which you can't argue, right, he had the sort of inkling of an idea when he was a student and just didn't like that homeless thing. It just irritated him. And you could feel it was like, a splinter in his mindset for a long period of time, and it never left him. And then when he became successful, didn't have to wait, forever and ever and ever to do that, immediately did something about that as far as the property is concerned. And 150,000 nights, man, I mean, can you imagine that? That's, wow. I mean, that's a huge contribution. And I think that's just growing in terms of how he's trying to get that wider message out there. And like the name too, don't you? Ethical Property Partners. It hints at the ethics. It hints at, obviously, it's focused on property and its partnerships. Couldn't think of a better name for a business if you're doing that, could you?
No. And indeed, we're seeing a lot of interest and activity, aren't we, within the supported living area amongst our members as well, and within the Wealth Builders community. So this is certainly an area that thankfully is really being addressed now.
I think so, and I like the fact, I like how it's growing. There's lots of new people that we'll be interviewing on the podcast very soon, Chris, who are equally as ethical, equally as focused and equally as inspiring. And what we're looking forward to doing is, getting as many of these messages out, because what we want people to do who are listening is not just listening and kind of applaud and say, well done, Frank, or well done, anybody that we interview, but take that as a piece of inspiration to take an action and then turn that wheel of wealth of education, get the support from people you trust, making lots of connections, doing thorough due diligence, then take the action, and then keep turning those wheels. And it, even if for most people it would take 5 to 7 years, and 5 to 7 years of kind of doing exciting work compared to working 40 years of uninspiring work, I don't know, Chris, I just hope we could get more and more people to make that decision to create wealth for themselves full on. And Frank's a great example of doing that.
Yeah, so thank you to Frank once again for sharing today. And Kevin, any further insights for those perhaps a little bit concerned about what we've got approaching us over the next 12 months?
Well, not really. I mean, I think I keep saying the same thing, don't I? Which is the same wind blows on us all. It's the set of the sail that makes the difference. And what we're here to do is help you set your tiller and help you adjust your sail, because there's always opportunity. There's never not opportunity. It doesn't matter what the economy is doing. It doesn't matter whether the stock market's up or down or interest rates are high or low. There's always a solution if you're willing to be creative. And that's what entrepreneurs do. They find solutions to somebody else's problem. And we'll keep doing more and more of that and bring more and more examples for you to see of people doing that. And hopefully it will inspire you to do the same.
Thanks for listening today. Thanks, Kevin. Enjoyed that as always.
Yeah, pleasure. Until next time, Chris. See ya.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode. Don't forget that we are constantly updating our resources inside the WealthBuilders membership site to help you create, build, and protect your wealth. Head over to wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership right now for free access. That's wealthbuilders.co.uk/membership.